The conference room at Meridian Industries smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, most of the building stood empty, but Sarah Chen sat perfectly still in the leather chair at the head of the mahogany table, watching 6 pairs of eyes study her with barely concealed skepticism. For 9 years, she had been the quiet IT manager who fixed servers and updated software. For 9 years, she had hidden the fact that she was one of only 12 women to ever complete Navy SEAL training. But when armed militants took control of the company's overseas facility with 43 hostages inside, the board of directors had just made her the crisis response leader. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of executives who had barely acknowledged her existence before tonight. Sarah adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and smoothed her cardigan, maintaining the carefully crafted image she had perfected over nearly a decade of corporate anonymity. Her fingers, steady and precise from years of handling explosive ordnance, now rested calmly on the polished wood surface while her mind automatically cataloged potential threats and escape routes in the room. CEO Marcus Wellington cleared his throat, his expensive suit wrinkled from the emergency meeting that had dragged him from his bed. "Chen," he began, using only her last name as he always did, "I want to be clear about something. We're not putting you in charge because we think you're qualified for this kind of situation. We're putting you in charge because you're the only department head who happened to be in the building when this crisis broke." Sarah nodded once, her expression unchanging. She had learned long ago that revealing emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford, whether in a boardroom or a battlefield. "Understood, sir." Wellington's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he expected more protest or at least some acknowledgement of the impossibility of the task ahead. "The facility in question is our research and development complex in Kandahar province. 43 employees, including some of our most valuable researchers, are being held by an unknown militant group. The local authorities are unreliable. The State Department is involved, but they're treating this as a negotiation situation." The mention of Kandahar sent a chill through Sarah's body that had nothing to do with the building's aggressive air conditioning. She had spent 14 months in that exact region, but not as an IT professional fixing computer problems. She had been there as Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, conducting counterterrorism operations against the same type of militants who now held her company's employees hostage. CFO Rebecca Morris leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping against her tablet screen. "The board has decided that since you oversee all our international IT infrastructure, you have the most comprehensive understanding of our overseas operations. You'll coordinate with law enforcement, manage communications with the families, and serve as our primary liaison with government agencies." Sarah processed this information while maintaining her carefully neutral expression. They were asking her to manage a hostage crisis because she knew how their computer servers worked. The irony was almost amusing, except that 43 lives hung in the balance, and she was probably the only person in this room who actually understood what those lives were facing. "The militants are calling themselves the Freedom Coalition of Afghan Patriots," continued Morris, reading from her tablet. "They're demanding the release of 12 prisoners held in various international facilities, plus $10 million in cryptocurrency. They've given us 72 hours to comply, or they start executing hostages." Wellington pulled up a map on the large monitor at the far end of the room. Red dots marked the location of the research facility, a cluster of buildings surrounded by desert and mountains. Sarah studied the terrain with eyes that had memorized similar maps during mission briefings, noting the elevation changes, potential sniper positions, and probable escape routes. To the executives around her, it was just a dot on a screen. To Sarah, it was a tactical problem she had solved dozens of times before. "The facility houses our Advanced Materials Research Division," Wellington explained. pointing to various buildings on the satellite image. They were working on classified contracts for the Department of Defense, composite armor materials, primarily. The research data alone is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Sarah's mind automatically shifted into operational planning mode. The militants weren't just grabbing random hostages for ransom money. They were targeting valuable research that could be sold to hostile nations or used to improve their own defensive capabilities. This was a strategic operation, not a crime of opportunity, which meant the hostage-takers were likely more sophisticated and better trained than the average. Terrorist cell. Legal counsel David Park spoke up from his position at the far end of the table. We need to be very careful about how we handle this. Any misstep could result in criminal liability for the company, not to mention the obvious humanitarian concerns. The FBI has offered to take the lead, but they want a company representative to coordinate private sector resources. Which brings us back to you, Chen, Wellington said, his tone suggesting he viewed her appointment as an unfortunate necessity, rather than a strategic choice. You'll work with a joint task force that includes FBI, State Department, and military advisors. Your job is to keep us informed and make sure our interests are protected. Sarah nodded again, already calculating the resources she would need and the timeline for various response options. But she couldn't reveal the depth of her analysis without exposing capabilities that were supposed to remain buried and classified. Files. What kind of timeline are we working with for communication attempts? The militants have agreed to accept phone calls twice daily, Morris replied. Noon and midnight local time. The next scheduled call is in approximately 7 hours. They're allowing us to verify the well-being of hostages, but they've made it clear that any rescue attempt will result in immediate executions. The threat was standard terrorist protocol, designed to discourage exactly the kind of direct action that Sarah knew was probably the only realistic solution. Negotiations might buy time, but experienced militants rarely released hostages voluntarily, especially when those hostages possessed valuable intelligence or research data. Wellington stood and began pacing, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished concrete floor. I want to be absolutely clear about our priorities here. First, we get our people home safely. Second, we protect our intellectual property. Third, we minimize damage to the company's reputation and legal standing. Everything else is secondary. Sarah listened to this hierarchy of concerns while privately developing her own priority list. Get the hostages out alive. Neutralize the threat permanently. Gather intelligence about the broader militant network. Protect operational security about her own background. Corporate reputation and intellectual property didn't even make her top 10. The research team leader is Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, Park continued, consulting his own notes. 15 years with the company, leading expert in advanced composite materials. Her team includes 8 other researchers, plus security staff and administrative personnel. The militants seem to understand the value of what they've captured. Sarah made a mental note about Dr. Rodriguez, while simultaneously calculating the tactical implications of 43 hostages spread across multiple buildings. Too many people to move quickly, too many variables to control during a rescue operation. But she had worked similar problems before, in environments where failure meant not just corporate embarrassment, but strategic defeat for American interests. Morris pulled up financial projections on her tablet. The ransom demand represents a significant, but not catastrophic expense for the company. The cryptocurrency requirement suggests they understand international banking regulations and digital currency anonymity. These aren't unsophisticated actors, which is why we need someone who can think strategically about this situation, Wellington added, stopping his pacing to face Sarah directly. You may not have experience with this kind of crisis, but you understand our operations better than anyone else here. You know our systems, our people, our vulnerabilities. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. If only he knew how well she understood vulnerabilities, Sarah thought. She had spent 2 years identifying and exploiting the weaknesses of similar militant organizations. She knew their training methods, their communication protocols, their psychological pressure points. She also knew that corporate executives negotiating with terrorists was like sending accountants to perform surgery. "I'll need access to all personnel files for the hostages," Sarah said, beginning to assert the authority she had been given. Complete security assessments of the facility, communication logs from the past 6 months, financial records of anyone, with access to the research data. Wellington raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a comprehensive request. If we're going to resolve this situation successfully, I need to understand every possible angle," Sarah replied. "The militants chose this target for specific reasons. Understanding those reasons will help us predict their next moves and identify potential negotiation leverage." The truth was that Sarah needed the information to plan a rescue operation, not a negotiation strategy. But she couldn't reveal that without explaining how she knew what kind of intelligence would be useful for tactical planning. Her cover identity as an IT manager provided perfect justification for requesting detailed facility information. Park nodded approvingly. "That makes sense. I'll have everything compiled by morning. I'll also need a secure communication line with the Joint Task Force," Sarah continued. "And I want to review the transcripts of all previous communications with the militants." "Already arranged," Morris said. "FBI Special Agent Patricia Williams will be your primary point of contact. She's en route from Washington and should arrive within the hour." Sarah felt a small knot of tension form in her stomach. FBI agents were trained to spot inconsistencies in civilian expertise, especially when that expertise seemed unusually sophisticated for someone's supposed background. She would need to be very careful about how she demonstrated her knowledge of tactical situations. Wellington returned to his seat, leaning back with the expression of a man who had transferred an unpleasant responsibility to someone else. "I want hourly updates on any developments. The board is meeting again at 6 a.m. to review our options." "One more thing," Sarah said, surprising herself with her directness. "I'll need authorization to make real-time decisions without board approval. If this situation develops rapidly, there won't be time for committee discussions." The executives exchanged glances. They were corporate creatures, accustomed to layers of approval and risk mitigation. The idea of giving unilateral authority to their IT manager clearly made them uncomfortable. "What kind of decisions are you anticipating?" Wellington asked carefully. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "The kind that save lives." After a moment of silence, Wellington nodded. "Fine. You have provisional authority to make operational decisions, subject to after-action review. But Chen?" His voice carried a warning. "Don't make us regret this." Sarah stood, gathering the folders and tablets they had provided. "You won't," she said quietly. As the executives filed out of the conference room, returning to their comfortable homes and familiar problems, Sarah remained behind, staring at the satellite image still displayed on the monitor. 43 lives depended on decisions she would make over the next 72 hours. For 9 years, she had successfully hidden her true capabilities, building a quiet life far from the violence and responsibility of her military service. But some doors, once opened, could never be completely closed. Some skills, once learned, became permanent parts of who you were. And sometimes, the past didn't stay buried, no matter how carefully you tried to bury it. Sarah Chen, IT manager, was about to disappear forever. In her place would emerge someone the board of directors had never imagined existed, a weapon they had accidentally placed in exactly the right position to do what needed to be done. The real crisis was just beginning. Sarah's apartment reflected 9 years of deliberate mediocrity. generic furniture from discount stores, a few houseplants that required minimal care, and walls decorated with inspirational posters about teamwork and persistence, the kind of decor that suggested someone trying too hard to fit into corporate culture. She moved through the space with practiced efficiency, changing from her business casual attire into jeans and a plain sweater, while her mind processed the weight of what she had just accepted. The bathroom mirror reflected a face that colleagues would describe as unremarkable. Shoulder-length black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wire-rimmed glasses that made her look studious rather than dangerous, and the kind of pale complexion that came from spending most daylight hours under fluorescent office lighting. It was a carefully crafted disguise that had taken months to perfect after her discharge from the Navy. She opened the medicine cabinet and retrieved what appeared to be a standard bottle of ibuprofen. But when she twisted the bottom, a hidden compartment revealed a small key and a slip of paper with numbers that looked like a safety deposit box combination. These were items she had hoped never to use again, artifacts from a life she had worked desperately to leave behind. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed Wellington's direct line, and she could hear the tension in his voice even before he spoke. "Chen, we've got a problem. The militants just moved up their timeline. They want an answer about the ransom in 36 hours. Not 72, and they've released a video." Sarah's blood went cold. Video releases were a standard escalation tactic, designed to increase psychological pressure while demonstrating the hostage-taker's seriousness. They were also often the prelude to executions, intended to show that the militants were willing to follow through on their threats. "Have you seen it?" she asked, already moving toward her laptop. "It's disturbing. I'm sending you the secure link now. FBI wants your assessment before they brief the task force." The video file arrived in her encrypted email within seconds. Sarah opened it on her laptop, her expression carefully neutral despite the fury building inside her chest. The footage showed Dr. Amanda Rodriguez and 3 other researchers kneeling in what appeared to be a concrete warehouse, their hands zip-tied behind their backs and cloth hoods over their heads. A masked figure spoke in accented English, reading from a prepared statement about American imperialism and corporate exploitation. But Sarah wasn't listening to the political rhetoric. Her trained eyes were cataloging tactical details that would be invisible to civilian observers. The acoustic properties of the space suggested a large, mostly empty building with concrete walls and a high ceiling. The lighting came from portable work lamps, indicating the militants were operating in a facility without reliable electrical infrastructure. Most importantly, she could see part of a window in the background with distinctive metal framework that matched the architectural style of converted Soviet-era industrial buildings. Dr. Rodriguez was clearly trying to communicate something beyond the script she was being forced to read. Her posture was too rigid, her vocal inflections slightly off. Sarah had been trained to recognize when hostages were attempting to convey information to potential rescuers, and Rodriguez was definitely sending a message. The video ended with the masked figure holding up a newspaper to prove the current date, then pointing a pistol at Rodriguez's head while delivering the updated ultimatum. 36 hours to transfer the cryptocurrency and arrange prisoner releases, or executions would begin. Sarah closed the laptop and sat in silence for several minutes, processing what she had observed. The militants were more sophisticated than typical terrorist cells, but they had made several critical mistakes that revealed important information about their location, resources, and operational capabilities. Unfortunately, she couldn't share those insights without explaining how an IT manager had developed such specialized analytical skills. Her secure phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Agent Williams. Arriving at your building in 10 minutes. Need to discuss operational parameters before task force briefing." Sarah glanced around her apartment, ensuring nothing was visible that might contradict her carefully maintained cover identity. The key and combination slip went back into the hidden compartment, and she replaced the ibuprofen bottle in the medicine cabinet. She changed into a more professional outfit, dark slacks and a button-down shirt that suggested competence without drawing attention. Agent Patricia Williams turned out to be a compact woman in her early 40s, with graying brown hair and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of dealing with life and death situations. She wore a simple black suit and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Miss Chen," Williams said as Sarah opened the door, "thank you for agreeing to coordinate with us on this situation. I understand you've been designated as the company's crisis response leader." Sarah gestured for Williams to enter, noting how the FBI agent's eyes automatically swept the apartment, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. It was exactly the kind of unconscious behavior that Sarah had trained herself to suppress over the past 9 years. "Can I offer you coffee?" Sarah asked, falling back on standard social protocols while her mind raced through the implications of federal involvement. "That would be helpful, thank you. We're going to be working some very long hours over the next day and a half." As Sarah prepared coffee in her small kitchen, Williams continued talking from the living room. "I've reviewed your personnel file. 8 years with Meridian Industries, degree in computer science from UC Berkeley, exemplary performance reviews. But I have to ask, have you ever dealt with anything like this before?" It was a perfectly reasonable question, but Sarah heard the subtle probing underneath. FBI agents were trained to identify deception, and Williams was already testing for inconsistencies in Sarah's background. "Nothing like this," Sarah replied truthfully. "But I've coordinated complex technical projects across multiple time zones and cultures. I understand how to manage resources and communication under pressure." Williams accepted the coffee mug and settled onto the couch, her posture relaxed but alert. "The task force includes representatives from FBI, State Department, DoD, and CIA. Everyone brings different expertise and priorities to the table. Your job is to make sure the private sector perspective gets heard." Sarah nodded, recognizing the political dynamics that would complicate any rescue operation. Multiple agencies met multiple chains of command, conflicting objectives, and the kind of bureaucratic delays that could prove fatal in a time-sensitive situation. "What's the current assessment of the militants' capabilities?" Sarah asked, careful to phrase her question in terms that an IT manager might reasonably ask. Williams pulled out a tablet and consulted her notes. "We're calling them the Freedom Coalition of Afghan Patriots, but that's almost certainly a name of convenience. Our analysts believe they're a splinter group from a larger organization, possibly with connections to international trafficking networks. They've demonstrated sophisticated planning and execution. The video suggests they have significant resources," Sarah observed, hoping to prompt more detailed intelligence sharing. "Exactly. Professional-grade recording equipment, edited footage, coordinated release across multiple platforms. These aren't cave-dwelling insurgents. They understand modern media and psychological warfare." Sarah sipped her coffee, processing this information while maintaining her civilian persona. The FBI's assessment matched her own preliminary analysis, but she suspected there were details being withheld either for classification reasons or because Williams wasn't certain about Sarah's trustworthiness. "Have you identified the specific prisoners they want released?" Sarah asked. Williams hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing how much information to share with a corporate representative. 12 individuals currently held in facilities across 3 countries. Mix of terrorism-related charges and weapons trafficking. What's interesting is that most of them were captured in operations related to advanced weapons technology. The pattern was becoming clearer. The militants weren't just seeking random prisoner releases. They were trying to recover specific individuals with expertise in military technology. Combined with their targeting of Meridian's composite armor research, it suggested a broader strategic objective related to weapons development. Dr. Rodriguez's research, Sarah said carefully. How sensitive is it? Classified above my clearance level, Williams replied. But I can tell you that losing that research would represent a significant national security concern. The State Department is very motivated to prevent that outcome. Sarah set down her coffee mug, considering the implications. If the research was that sensitive, there would be enormous pressure to prevent it from falling into hostile hands, even if that meant accepting casualties among the hostages. The calculus of national security often required terrible choices about individual lives. What about a rescue operation? Sarah asked, trying to sound like a concerned corporate manager rather than someone conducting tactical planning. Williams gave her a sharp look. That would be extremely difficult given the location and circumstances. We don't have reliable intelligence about the facility layout, hostage locations, or militant strength. A failed rescue attempt would likely result in multiple casualties. The FBI agent was being diplomatic, but Sarah understood the subtext. Any rescue operation would require extensive reconnaissance, detailed facility intelligence, and a team with specialized training in hostage situations. The kind of operation that took weeks to plan properly, not hours. However, Williams continued, we are exploring all options. Which is why I need to understand exactly what kind of support Meridian can provide. Sarah had been expecting this. Question. Corporate resources that might be useful in a hostage situation were limited, but her IT background provided plausible justification for several capabilities that would actually prove crucial. I can provide detailed technical specifications for all our international facilities, Sarah said. Building layouts, security systems, communication infrastructure. I also have access to personnel records and security clearances for everyone. Being held, that would be extremely valuable. What about local contacts? Suppliers, contractors, anyone who might have current intelligence about the situation on the ground? Sarah's pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of question that could expose her true background if she answered too knowledgeably. But it was also an opportunity to begin positioning resources for a potential rescue operation. I'll need to review our vendor databases, she said carefully. But we do work with local security contractors and logistics companies. Some of them might have useful information. Williams made notes on her tablet, clearly pleased with Sarah's cooperative attitude. We'll need all of that information compiled as quickly as possible. The task force meets in 2 hours, and we want to present a comprehensive assessment of our options. After Williams left, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, staring out the window at the city lights below. For 9 years she had successfully maintained her cover identity, building a quiet life where her most challenging decisions involved software updates and budget allocations. But the events of the past few hours had shattered that carefully constructed normalcy. 43. People were going to die unless someone took action. The FBI was competent, but constrained by jurisdiction and protocol. The State Department would prioritize diplomatic solutions over direct action. The military would eventually develop a rescue plan, but bureaucratic delays might make it too late to matter. Sarah opened her laptop and began accessing databases that officially she shouldn't know existed. Her corporate login credentials provided one layer of authorization, but the advanced searches she was conducting required knowledge of classified system architectures that an IT manager would never possess. Within 30 minutes, she had compiled detailed intelligence about the research facility, including architectural drawings, security protocols, and personnel assignments. She also accessed satellite imagery updated within the past 12 hours, showing vehicle movements and activity patterns around the compound, but the most valuable information came from sources that had nothing to do with Meridian Industries. Using encrypted communication channels she had hoped never to use again, Sarah reached out to contacts from her military service, who now worked in various government agencies and private security firms. The responses came back quickly, painting a disturbing picture. The Freedom Coalition of Afghan Patriots was indeed a front organization, likely controlled by a sophisticated international network with ties to state-sponsored terrorism. The prisoners they wanted released included several individuals with advanced technical knowledge about American military systems. Most importantly, her contacts confirmed what Sarah had already suspected. The hostages were being held in a converted industrial facility approximately 12 kilometers from the research complex. The building had been used as a weapons storage depot during the Soviet occupation, which explained both its remote location and its robust construction. Sarah closed her laptop and walked to the bathroom mirror, studying her reflection one more time. The woman looking back at her still appeared to be a mild-mannered IT manager, someone who fixed computers and attended budget meetings. But underneath that carefully maintained exterior, something else was stirring to life. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen had spent 2 years hunting exactly these kinds of terrorists through exactly this kind of terrain. She had planned and executed rescue operations in similar facilities against similar enemies. She possessed skills and knowledge that could save 43 lives, but using those skills would destroy the quiet life she had spent 9 years building. The choice, she realized, wasn't really a choice at all. Some doors once opened could never be closed. Some responsibilities, once accepted, became permanent parts of who you were. And some skills, no matter how carefully buried, were too important to keep hidden when lives hung in the balance. Sarah Chen, IT manager, was about to cease existing. In her place would emerge someone the corporate world had never suspected existed. A weapon that had been accidentally placed in exactly the right position to do what needed to be done. The transformation had already begun. The FBI field office buzzed with controlled urgency at 3 in the morning. Fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across clusters of agents hunched over computer terminals and tactical displays. Sarah entered the building carrying a leather portfolio that contained officially sanctioned corporate intelligence reports, while an encrypted thumb drive in her jacket pocket held information that would raise uncomfortable questions about how an IT manager had acquired such detailed reconnaissance data. Agent Williams met her at the security checkpoint, looking alert despite the early hour. The task force is assembled in conference room. A fair warning. There are some strong personalities in there, and not everyone agrees on the best approach. Sarah followed Williams through corridors lined with wanted posters and organizational charts, her mind automatically cataloging the building's layout and security measures. The habits of operational awareness died hard, even after 9 years of deliberately suppressing them. Conference Room A contained 12 people arranged around an oval table covered with laptops, secure phones, and stacks of classified folders. Sarah recognized the types immediately. FBI agents with their methodical precision, State Department officials in expensive suits, military officers whose bearing spoke of combat experience, and CIA representatives whose faces revealed nothing about their thoughts. Everyone, this is Sarah Chen from Meridian Industries, Williams announced. She's coordinating private sector resources and serving as our primary corporate liaison. A gray-haired man in Air Force dress blues looked up from his tactical assessment. Colonel James Morrison, JSOC. Miss Chen, we need to understand exactly what kind of facility we're dealing with. The satellite imagery shows a complex layout, but we need ground truth information about internal structures and security measures. Sarah opened her portfolio and distributed copies of architectural drawings that officially she had pulled from corporate archives. These are the original construction documents from 2018, plus security upgrades completed last year. The main research building is hardened against explosive devices, with reinforced concrete walls and limited access points. CIA representative. Elena Vasquez studied the drawings with professional interest. What about the personnel? Any of your people have military or security backgrounds that might help them survive or resist? Dr. Rodriguez has emergency response training, and 2 of the security staff are former military police, Sarah replied, carefully omitting the fact that she had already identified 3 other hostages with combat experience based on classified service records. But they're researchers and administrators, not operators. State Department liaison Michael Chino relation, despite the shared surname, leaned forward with the expression of someone accustomed to diplomatic solutions. Before we discuss rescue scenarios, we need to exhaust negotiation options. The militants have demonstrated willingness to communicate, which suggests they're open to reasonable compromise. Colonel Morrison's jaw tightened slightly. Reasonable compromise? They're holding 43 Americans hostage and demanding the release of known terrorists. There's nothing reasonable about this situation. Nevertheless, Chen continued smoothly, military action should be a last resort. The political implications of a failed rescue attempt could destabilize the entire region. Sarah listened to this debate while studying the faces around the table, recognizing the familiar tension between diplomatic caution and operational urgency. She had seen similar discussions during her military service, where bureaucratic considerations often conflicted with tactical realities. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres spoke up from her position near the wall-mounted monitors. We've completed preliminary analysis of the video release. The acoustic signature suggests a large enclosed space with concrete construction. Background noise indicates proximity to vehicular traffic, possibly a major road or highway. Sarah nodded, impressed by the Bureau's analytical capabilities, while privately noting that her own assessment had identified significantly more details about the probable location. The window frame visible in one corner of the footage matched architectural patterns used in Soviet-era industrial construction, and the specific lighting angle suggested the facility was oriented northeast-southwest. What about electronic surveillance? Asked Agent Williams. Can we establish any kind of remote monitoring? Morrison consulted his tactical notes. NSA is working on signal intercepts, but the militants are using encrypted communications and rotating frequencies. They clearly understand electronic warfare countermeasures. Vasquez added her own intelligence assessment. Our sources suggest this group has ties to international weapons trafficking networks. The prisoners they want released include several individuals with advanced technical knowledge about American military systems. This isn't just about ransom money. Sarah processed this information while maintaining her civilian persona, but her mind was racing through the strategic implications. The militants were seeking to recover specific expertise, not just generating publicity or funding. That suggested a longer-term objective related to weapons development or military capability enhancement. Ms. Chen, Morrison said, directing his attention toward her. Your company's research, how sensitive is it really? Because if we're talking about technology that could enhance enemy capabilities, that changes our risk calculation significantly. Sarah had been prepared for this question, but answering it required walking the careful line between corporate loyalty and operational security. The composite armor research represents several years of advanced materials development. Losing that technology would give hostile actors significant advantages in defensive systems. Translation: it's worth killing people to protect, Morrison said bluntly. State Department Chen looked uncomfortable with such direct language. Colonel, let's maintain focus on diplomatic solutions. We have 34 hours remaining before the militants' deadline. That's sufficient time to arrange prisoner transfers if we can identify acceptable candidates. Acceptable candidates? Torres interjected. These are convicted terrorists we're talking about. The Justice Department will Never approve releases that could endanger American lives. Sarah watched this bureaucratic chess match while privately calculating the time requirements for a rescue operation. Even with perfect intelligence and unlimited resources, planning and executing a successful hostage rescue would require at least 18 hours. Every minute spent on diplomatic discussions reduced the window for direct action. Williams pulled up a new display on the main monitor. We've established communication protocols for the next scheduled contact in 6 hours. Miss Chen, we'll need you to participate in that conversation since the militants have specifically requested to speak with corporate representatives. Sarah's pulse quickened. Direct communication with the hostage takers would provide crucial intelligence about their psychological state, operational capabilities, and strategic objectives. It would also give her an opportunity to assess their military training and tactical sophistication. What kind of approach are you recommending? Sarah asked. Standard negotiation protocols, Williams replied. Express concern for the hostages. Request proof of life. Probe for flexibility on their demands. Keep them talking while we develop other options. Sarah nodded, understanding the strategy while privately planning her own agenda for the conversation. Experienced hostage negotiators followed established procedures designed to build rapport and reduce tensions. But someone with her background would be listening for entirely different information, preparing and narrating. This type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. See, Aya Vasquez stood and moved to a secure terminal near the back wall. I'm going to run background checks on all the prisoners they want released. Maybe we can find some lower value targets that would satisfy their demands without compromising national security. Morrison consulted his watch. My team is developing preliminary rescue scenarios based on the intelligence we have available. But I need to emphasize that any direct action would be extremely high risk given the facility location and hostage distribution. Sarah almost asked about insertion methods and extraction routes before catching herself. An IT manager wouldn't know the right questions to ask about tactical planning, and displaying such knowledge would expose capabilities she needed to keep hidden. Instead, she asked, what kind of timeline are we looking at for various options? Negotiated settlement could happen within hours if we can find acceptable terms, State Department Chen replied. Prisoner exchange might take several days to arrange, assuming we can get international cooperation. Military option requires significant preparation time, Morrison added. We're talking about deploying specialized units to a remote location with minimal intelligence about enemy strength and hostage locations, not something we can improvise successfully. Torres looked up from her computer terminal. I'm seeing increased chatter on social media platforms associated with the group. They're building narrative momentum around their demands, trying to generate international pressure for prisoner releases. Sarah made a mental note about the militants' media strategy while wondering what kind of operational security they maintained. Around their actual planning discussions, professional terrorist organizations typically separated their propaganda activities from their tactical operations, but less sophisticated groups often made mistakes that revealed valuable intelligence. Miss Chen, Vasquez called from her terminal. I need to understand more about your company's local relationships. Who do you work with for security, logistics, transportation? Anyone who might have current intelligence about militant activities. In the region? Sarah had been dreading this line of questioning, but she had prepared plausible answers that would satisfy immediate curiosity, without revealing the depth of her actual knowledge. We contract with several local firms for various services. I can provide contact information, but most of our security arrangements go through regional offices. Regional offices where? Morrison asked, his attention sharpening. Dubai primarily, with coordination through our Frankfurt Logistics Center. Sarah was improvising now, Drawing on her knowledge of how multinational corporations actually structured their overseas operations, Williams made notes while speaking. We'll need complete contact lists and service agreements. Local contractors might have observed surveillance activities or unusual movements in the area. Sarah nodded agreement while privately calculating how to provide useful information without revealing that her real sources were former military colleagues, now working in private security and intelligence consulting. The network of special operations veterans was surprisingly extensive and well-connected, but accessing that network would require explanations she couldn't provide. The secure phone in Agent Torres's hand buzzed with an incoming message. She read the display and looked up sharply. "We just received another communication from the militants. They want to move the next scheduled call up by 2 hours." Morrison leaned forward. "That's not normal protocol. What's driving the change?" Torres read from her phone. "They're claiming increased military activity in the region is making them nervous. They want immediate confirmation that negotiation is proceeding in good faith." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Accelerated communication schedules often indicated that hostage-takers were preparing for a final phase of their operation, either prisoner release or execution. The militants were increasing pressure while positioning themselves to act quickly. If negotiations failed, this could be positive, State Department Chen observed. If they're worried about military intervention, they might be more willing to accept reasonable compromises. Or it could mean they're preparing to start killing hostages, Morrison replied grimly. "In my experience, rushed timelines usually favor the bad guys." Williams stood and moved toward the secure communication equipment. "Either way, we need to be ready for that call. Ms. Chen, I want you to review everything we know about the hostages. Personal information, family situations, anything that might give us leverage or help us assess the militant psychological approach." Sarah accepted a stack of personnel files while recognizing the irony of the situation. She probably knew more about several of the hostages than their own families did, based on classified background investigations and security clearances. But she had to pretend to be learning this information for the first time. Dr. Rodriguez's file contained the expected academic credentials and research experience. But Sarah's trained eye noticed subtle indicators of military family background and survival training that wouldn't be obvious to civilian observers. 3 other hostages had prior service records that included specialized training relevant to resistance and escape techniques. "Agent Williams," Sarah said carefully, "some of these people have backgrounds that might help them survive or even assist in a rescue operation." Williams looked up from her own preparation materials. "Such as?" "Dr. Rodriguez has advanced first aid certification and emergency response training. 2 of the security staff are former military police with relevant experience. If we could establish covert communication, they might be able to provide intelligence about the facility layout and guard patterns." Morrison's expression sharpened with professional interest. "That's worth exploring. Do we have any way to make contact without alerting the militants?" Torres consulted her technical resources. "Depends on whether they have access to personal devices. We might be able to establish encrypted communications through social media platforms or messaging apps." Sarah already knew the answer to this question based on her previous reconnaissance, but she couldn't reveal that information without explaining how she had acquired it. Instead, she said, "I can provide their personal contact information and social media accounts. Most of our employees maintain company-issued devices even during overseas assignments." The discussion continued for another hour, covering communication protocols, negotiation strategies, and contingency planning. Sarah contributed appropriately while privately developing her own operational timeline and resource requirements. The federal task force was competent and well-intentioned, but they were approaching the situation with bureaucratic caution, that might prove fatal for the hostages. As the meeting concluded, Sarah gathered her materials while mentally preparing for the next phase of her involvement. The scheduled communication with the militants would provide crucial intelligence, but it would also begin exposing her true capabilities to federal agents trained to spot deception and inconsistency. The transformation she had been avoiding for 9 years was accelerating beyond her control. Soon, it would become impossible to maintain her civilian cover while doing what needed to be done to save 43 lives. But some responsibilities, once accepted, became permanent parts of who you were. Some skills, no matter how carefully hidden, were too important to keep buried when people were depending on you. The real test was just beginning. The secure communication line crackled with static at exactly 10 a.m. local time, 3 hours ahead of the original schedule. Sarah sat in the FBI's Technical Operations Center, wearing a headset connected to recording equipment, while Agent Williams monitored voice stress analysis software on an adjacent terminal. Around the room, 12 federal agents and analysts, prepared to extract every possible piece of intelligence from the conversation. A distorted voice, speaking heavily accented English, came through the speakers. "This is Commander Razak of the Freedom Coalition. I speak now with the American Corporation representatives." Agent Williams nodded toward Sarah, indicating she should take the lead while following the negotiation script they had prepared. But as soon as Sarah heard the voice, her blood went cold. She recognized not just the accent patterns, but specific vocal characteristics that triggered memories from classified briefings 3 years earlier. "This is Sarah Chen from Meridian Industries," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the shock of recognition. "We're prepared to discuss the safe release of our employees." "Good. You understand we are serious people with serious demands. Your government has 48 hours to release our brothers and transfer the money we require. If this does not happen, we begin executing hostages every 6 hours." The timeline had been shortened again, from 36 hours to 24, then to 18. Sarah recognized the tactic constant pressure, designed to prevent careful planning while forcing hasty decisions that favored the hostage-takers. "We want to resolve this peacefully," Sarah said, following the script. "But we need proof that our people are unharmed. Can you put Dr. Rodriguez on the line?" "Dr. Rodriguez is comfortable. She will speak when we choose to allow it. First, you must demonstrate good faith by beginning prisoner release procedures." Sarah made eye contact with Williams, who was frantically typing notes about voice patterns and linguistic analysis. But Sarah was processing entirely different information. The man calling himself Commander Razak was actually Halil Nazari, a former Afghan army officer who had defected to the Taliban in 2019 before establishing his own militant organization. She had spent 2 months tracking him through the mountains of Kandahar province before a political decision terminated the operation. "We're working with State Department officials to review the prisoner list," Sarah replied. "But some of these individuals are held by other countries. The process requires international coordination." "Coordination," Razak repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "American word for delay and deception. We know your government's tricks. You stall while your military plans attack." Sarah felt a chill as she realized Razak was right. Even as they spoke, Colonel Morrison was undoubtedly developing rescue scenarios that would take days to implement properly. The militants weren't wrong to suspect military planning, which made them more likely to accelerate their own timeline. "No military action is being planned," Sarah lied smoothly. "We want to negotiate a peaceful solution that gets everyone home safely." "Perhaps. But we are not stupid people, Miss Chen. We know American tactics. We know American technology. We know what your company builds for your military." The statement contained layers of implication that made Sarah's pulse quicken. "Razak, Wasn't just talking about the composite armor research, he was suggesting knowledge of other projects, possibly including classified programs that weren't supposed to exist. Our research is primarily civilian applications, Sarah said carefully. Medical equipment, automotive safety systems, consumer products. Razak's laugh was harsh and bitter. Medical equipment? Your Dr. Rodriguez designs armor that stops bullets from Russian rifles. Your composite materials make American tanks invulnerable to our weapons. Do not insult my intelligence with lies about medical equipment. Agent Williams was gesturing frantically, pointing to her screen where voice analysis software was displaying stress indicators and deception markers. But Sarah was focused on extracting tactical intelligence while maintaining her cover role. If you understand the value of our research, Sarah said, then you know it represents years of work by dedicated people. Dr. Rodriguez and her team are scientists, not soldiers. They don't deserve to suffer for political disagreements. Deserve? Razak's voice rose with genuine anger. Did the children in Kandahar deserve to die from American bombs? Did my brother deserve to burn in your drone attacks? Your scientists build weapons that kill my people. Now they learn what it feels like to be helpless. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, recognizing the personal motivation underlying the tactical operation. Razak wasn't just seeking strategic advantage, he was seeking revenge for losses that had driven him to extremism. That psychological profile made him both more dangerous and more predictable. I understand you've suffered losses, Sarah said, abandoning the script to engage directly with his emotional state. War causes pain for everyone involved. But these hostages didn't make those decisions. They're not responsible for policies they didn't create. Responsible? Razak laughed again. They build the tools of war. They profit from the machinery of death. They are as guilty as the pilots who dropped the bombs. Williams was shaking her head, indicating that Sarah should return to established negotiation protocols. But Sarah's instincts, honed by years of interrogating captured militants, told her that emotional engagement might reveal more useful intelligence than standard procedures. What would it take to end this peacefully? Sarah asked. Beyond the prisoner releases and money, what do you really want? The line went silent for nearly 30 seconds. When Razak spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, less performative. More genuine. I want the world to see American vulnerability. I want your people to understand that your technology cannot protect you from consequences. I want proof that your military empire has limits. Sarah exchanged glances with Williams, recognizing that they had just heard the real objective underlying the operation. Razak wasn't just seeking prisoner releases or ransom money. He was conducting a demonstration designed to expose perceived American weaknesses. The world is watching, Sarah acknowledged. But what they see depends on how this ends. If you harm innocent people, you become the villain in the story. If you show mercy, you demonstrate strength and principle. Mercy, Razak repeated thoughtfully. An interesting concept from people who show no mercy to my country. Sarah decided to take a calculated risk that might provide crucial intelligence, while potentially opening communication channels. I've been to Afghanistan, she said quietly. I've seen the costs of conflict on all sides. I know that good people get caught in situations they never chose. The admission was technically true while being deliberately misleading about the nature of her experience. But it had the desired effect. Razak's voice sharpened with interest. You have been to my country? In what capacity? Humanitarian work. Sarah lied smoothly. Medical supplies, infrastructure repair. I've seen how war affects civilian populations. Williams was staring at her with obvious confusion, clearly wondering why an IT manager would have humanitarian experience in Afghanistan. Sarah realized she was walking a dangerous line between extracting intelligence and exposing her true background. Then, you understand, Razak said, his voice softer now. You understand why we fight. Why we cannot accept endless occupation and exploitation. I understand that everyone wants their families to be safe, Sarah replied. Including the families of the people you're holding. Dr. Rodriguez has 2 children. The security guards have wives and parents who are terrified right now. As were the families in the villages your military destroyed. As are the parents of the prisoners you refuse to release. Sarah sensed an opening in Razak's psychological defenses and decided to probe further. If we could arrange the release of some prisoners, not all, but some, would you consider releasing some of the hostages as a show of good faith? The suggestion violated standard negotiation protocols, which insisted on all-or-nothing exchanges to prevent militants from gaining partial victories. But Sarah was operating according to different principles, seeking to create momentum toward a solution while gathering intelligence about Razak's decision-making process. Which prisoners? Razak asked, his voice immediately becoming more businesslike. Sarah looked at Williams, who was frantically shaking her head while pointing to protocol guidelines on her screen. But Sarah had moved beyond following federal procedures. She was conducting her own operation now. The 3 individuals being held in Germany for weapons trafficking charges, Sarah said, drawing on intelligence briefings she wasn't supposed to have access to. They're not high-value targets, and their release wouldn't significantly impact national security. Razak was quiet for almost a minute, clearly conferring with others in the background. Sarah could hear muffled voices speaking. Rapid Pashto, though she was careful not to react to words she understood from her military language training. Those 3, plus the woman held in France for financing operations, Razak finally replied. In exchange, we will release 5 hostages of our choosing. Williams was gesturing wildly, indicating that Sarah should stall and seek guidance from senior officials. But Sarah recognized that momentum in hostage negotiations was fragile, and temporary hesitation often meant lost opportunities. I'll need to confirm that with government representatives, Sarah said. But it sounds like a reasonable starting point for building trust between us. You have 4 hours to provide confirmation, Razak replied. If we do not receive acceptable proof that prisoner releases are proceeding, we will execute the first hostage and send you video evidence. The line went dead, leaving the operations center in stunned silence. Agent Williams removed her headset and stared at Sarah with an expression that combined admiration with deep suspicion. Where the hell did that come from? Williams asked. You just conducted an unauthorized negotiation that commits the United States government to prisoner releases. Sarah removed her own headset, realizing that she had crossed a line that would be difficult to explain without revealing capabilities she needed to keep hidden. I was following his emotional cues and looking for openings. It seemed like he was willing to compromise if we showed flexibility. Flexibility? Williams stood and began pacing. You offered to release convicted terrorists without any authorization whatsoever. The State Department is going to have a meltdown when they hear this recording. Other agents and analysts in the room were already placing urgent phone calls to their supervisors, reporting the unexpected development in the negotiation. Sarah realized that she had approximately 30 minutes before senior officials would demand detailed explanations of her background and qualifications. The important thing is that we establish communication and identify potential areas for compromise, Sarah said, trying to sound like a corporate manager rather than an experienced interrogator. We learned about his psychological motivations and opened a channel for further discussion. Williams stopped pacing and fixed Sarah with a steady stare. We also learned that you have experience in Afghanistan that wasn't mentioned in your personnel file, and you demonstrated negotiation skills that are way beyond what I'd expect from an IT manager. Sarah felt the careful facade she had maintained for 9 years beginning to crack under federal scrutiny. I did some volunteer work with relief organizations. Basic project coordination, nothing specialized. Relief organizations that taught you to recognize psychological manipulation techniques, and conduct impromptu prisoner exchange negotiations? Williams's voice carried the skeptical tone of an investigator who had identified inconsistencies in a subject's story before Sarah could respond. The secure phone rang again. Williams answered immediately, her expression growing increasingly serious as she listened to the voice on the other end. "That was the State Department," Williams said after ending the call. "They want you in Washington immediately for a full briefing on your background and qualifications. Apparently, your improvised negotiation just became official U.S. policy." Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and dread. Her unauthorized initiative had potentially saved lives by opening negotiations, but it had also focused government attention on capabilities she had spent 9 years trying to hide. "What does that mean exactly?" Sarah asked. "It means that in approximately 6 hours, you're going to be sitting in a secure conference room explaining to some very senior people how an IT manager managed to establish rapport with a terrorist leader and negotiate prisoner releases that nobody else thought were possible." Williams gathered her equipment while speaking. "It also means that your company's crisis response leader just became a key player in international counterterrorism policy. I hope you're ready for that level of scrutiny." Sarah nodded, understanding that her carefully constructed civilian identity was about to face examination by professionals trained to detect deception and false credentials. The transformation she had been avoiding was no longer optional. It was being forced by circumstances beyond her control, but 43 lives were still at stake, and she was the only person in the room who truly understood what they were facing. Halil Nazari was a sophisticated opponent who wouldn't be defeated by standard procedures or bureaucratic caution. If they wanted her to step out of the shadows and reveal her true capabilities, she would do it. But once that door opened, there would be no going back to the quiet life she had spent 9 years building. The real operation was just beginning. The flight to Washington took 4 hours, during which Sarah sat in uncomfortable silence while Agent Williams reviewed classified files on her laptop. Every few minutes, Williams would glance up with an expression that suggested she was reassessing everything she thought she knew about Meridian Industries' mild-mannered IT manager. The questions were coming, and Sarah knew her carefully constructed cover story wouldn't survive professional scrutiny much longer. The black SUV that met them at Reagan National Airport drove directly to a nondescript office building in Langley, Virginia. No signs identified the facility, but Sarah recognized the architectural style and security measures of a CIA installation. As they passed through multiple checkpoints, each requiring biometric verification, she realized the government's interest in her background had escalated far beyond routine debriefing protocols. Conference Room 3B contained 8 people who represented the highest levels of American counterterrorism leadership. Sarah recognized Deputy Director of Operations Patricia Hawkins from classified briefings she wasn't supposed to have attended, and General Michael Rodriguez from Joint Special Operations planning sessions that officially had never happened. The other faces belonged to senior officials whose names appeared in intelligence reports but whose actual roles remained carefully compartmentalized. "Miss Chen," Director Hawkins began without preamble, "we've reviewed the audio from your conversation with the individual calling himself Commander Razak. Your performance was impressive, almost as if you had prior experience with this type of negotiation." Sarah settled into the chair they indicated while mentally calculating how much truth she could reveal without compromising operational security. "I tried to follow his emotional cues and look for openings. It seemed like a reasonable approach, given the circumstances." General Rodriguez leaned forward, his weathered face showing the skeptical expression of someone who had spent 30 years in special operations. "Ms. Chen, I've listened to that recording 3 times. You demonstrated techniques that are taught in advanced interrogation and negotiation courses that aren't available to civilian personnel. I've read extensively about conflict resolution and crisis management, Sarah replied, knowing. The explanation sounded inadequate even as she spoke the words. Corporate training programs cover basic negotiation strategies. Deputy Director Hawkins opened a thick file folder and withdrew several documents. We've conducted a comprehensive review of your background, Ms. Chen, your official personnel. Records show 8 years with Meridian Industries, preceded by a degree in computer science from UC Berkeley. Standard corporate career trajectory, nothing unusual. Sarah waited for the inevitable revelation, recognizing the setup that preceded devastating exposure of false credentials. But Hawkins continued with an unexpected direction. However, we've also discovered some interesting gaps in your documentation. Employment periods that don't quite align with tax records. Educational transcripts that contain minor inconsistencies. Travel records that suggest international experience not reflected in your corporate assignments. Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized they had identified discrepancies without necessarily understanding their significance. The cover identity she had constructed was sophisticated enough to pass routine background checks, but it wasn't designed to withstand the kind of detailed investigation that only government intelligence agencies could conduct. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Sarah said carefully. My employment history is straightforward. College, followed by entry-level IT positions, then advancement to management roles. CIA analyst David Park spoke up from his position near the back wall. Ms. Chen, we've identified 17 separate instances where your official location, according to Meridian records, doesn't match credit card transactions, cell phone data, or other digital footprints. These discrepancies span a period of approximately 3 years from 2019 to 2022. Sarah realized they had uncovered evidence of her military service without understanding what they were looking at. The classified nature of her SEAL operations meant that official records had been carefully sanitized, but complete erasure of digital traces was impossible in the modern surveillance environment. Preparing and narrating this type of story took U.S.-long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. I traveled frequently for work, Sarah said, sticking to her cover story. International consulting projects, vendor negotiations, system installations. My corporate records might not reflect every trip. General Rodriguez exchanged glances with Director Hawkins, clearly communicating through subtle signals developed over years of classified collaboration. Ms. Chen, we're going to ask you some direct questions, and I strongly encourage you to provide honest answers. The situation in Afghanistan has escalated beyond routine hostage negotiation, and we need to understand exactly who we're working with. Sarah braced herself for interrogation techniques she had been trained to resist, while simultaneously recognizing the irony of the situation. She was about to be questioned by people who were probably less skilled at extracting information than she was at concealing it. 3 hours ago, Hawkins continued, the militant group released another video. This one shows Dr. Rodriguez and 2 other hostages in what appears to be a different location from the first footage. Our analysts believe the hostages have been moved, possibly in preparation for execution, or as a response to increased security pressure. Sarah absorbed this information while maintaining her civilian persona, but her mind immediately began processing the tactical implications. Moving hostages typically indicated either preparation for final demands or anticipation of rescue operations. Either scenario suggested that time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. More importantly, Rodriguez added, intercepts from NSA indicate that the group calling itself the Freedom Coalition is actually a front for a much larger organization. We're dealing with professional operatives, not local militants motivated by regional grievances. Sarah already knew this from her recognition of Halil Nazari, but she couldn't reveal that knowledge without explaining. How an IT manager had identified a high-value target from voice patterns alone. Instead, she asked, "What does that mean? For the negotiation approach?" "It means," Hawkins replied grimly, "that standard diplomatic solutions are unlikely to succeed. Professional terrorist organizations don't typically release hostages voluntarily, regardless of concessions offered. They're more likely to execute prisoners and disappear rather than engage in prolonged negotiations." Park consulted his laptop and looked up with grave expression. "We've also identified the probable location where the hostages are being held. Satellite imagery shows a converted industrial facility approximately 15 kilometers from the research complex. The structure appears to be fortified and defensible, with limited approaches and multiple escape routes." Sarah felt a cold recognition settle in her stomach. The facility Park was describing matched locations she had surveilled during classified operations 3 years earlier. If Nazari was using one of his established safe houses, she might actually know more about the building layout and security measures than current intelligence assessments could provide. "What kind of rescue options are being considered?" Sarah asked, trying to sound like a concerned corporate representative rather than someone conducting tactical planning. Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Extremely limited options. The facility is in a remote area with minimal infrastructure. Any approach would be visible for kilometers in all directions. The militants would have ample warning to execute hostages before any rescue force could reach them. Additionally," Hawkins added, "we've confirmed that several of the prisoners they want released are currently being held by allied nations. Arranging those releases would require diplomatic negotiations that could take weeks, even with maximum pressure from the White House." Sarah realized that the federal task force was approaching a dead end. Diplomatic solutions were impractical. Military options were nearly impossible, and time was running out at an accelerated pace. The hostages were going to die unless someone took action that went beyond standard procedures and bureaucratic protocols. "Miss Chen," Rodriguez said, his tone becoming more direct, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Have you ever had any contact with military or intelligence personnel in a professional capacity?" The question was phrased carefully, designed to identify connections without directly accusing her of false credentials. Sarah recognized the technique and understood that her next words would determine whether her cover identity survived or collapsed entirely. "I've participated in corporate security briefings when traveling to high-risk areas," Sarah replied, which was technically true while being deliberately misleading about the nature of those briefings. Standard protocols for employees working in regions with elevated threat levels. Hawkins made notes while speaking. The security briefings, who conducted them? Private contractors? Government agencies? Corporate security departments? Sarah realized she was being led into increasingly specific questions that would eventually expose contradictions in her story. Professional interrogators were trained to build detailed narratives that could be verified through multiple sources, and she was running out of plausible explanations for her demonstrated capabilities. "Various sources," Sarah said vaguely. "It depended on the specific assignment and security requirements." Park looked up from his laptop with an expression of someone who had just discovered significant information. "Miss Chen, we've just received interesting intelligence from our sources in the region. The individual calling himself Commander Razak appears to be using communication equipment and tactical protocols associated with former Afghan military personnel." Sarah's blood went cold as she realized they were identifying the same patterns she had recognized during the phone call. If their intelligence sources were comprehensive enough, they might eventually identify Nazari and discover her previous operational history against his organization. "What does that suggest about negotiation strategies?" Sarah asked, hoping to redirect the conversation away from her background. "It suggests," Rodriguez replied, That we're dealing with someone who understands American military procedures and might be able to anticipate standard rescue operations. Someone with that kind of background would be extremely difficult to surprise or outmaneuver. Hawkins closed her file folder and leaned back in her chair. Ms. Chen, we're facing a situation where conventional approaches are likely to fail, and unconventional approaches require resources and expertise that aren't readily available through normal channels. Sarah sensed that the conversation was building toward a specific request or revelation, but she couldn't predict what direction it would take. What kind of unconventional approaches? The kind, Rodriguez said carefully, that might require personnel with specialized backgrounds and capabilities that don't appear in official records. Personnel who might understand the operational environment and tactical challenges better than our current assessment suggests. The implication hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. They were suggesting that resolving the crisis might require people with capabilities that went beyond standard government resources, people whose backgrounds included experience they weren't supposed to possess. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, Sarah said. Though she understood perfectly, Hawkins reopened her file and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Miss Chen, we're asking whether you might know someone directly or indirectly who has the kind of specialized experience that could be useful in this situation. Someone who understands the region, the tactical environment, and the type of adversary we're facing. Sarah stared at the paper Hawkins had placed on the table, recognizing it as a standard government contractor agreement with classified project authorization. They weren't just asking for her cooperation. They were offering her official status that would provide legal protection for actions that went beyond civilian capabilities. Someone with that kind of background would be difficult to find on short notice, Sarah replied, understanding that she was being offered an opportunity to reveal her true qualifications while maintaining plausible deniability about how she had acquired them. Rodriguez leaned forward with the intensity of someone who had spent years managing life and death operations. Ms. Chen, 43 American lives are at stake. Standard procedures and diplomatic solutions are not going to save those people. If you know someone who might be able to help officially or unofficially, now is the time to make that connection. Sarah looked around the room at 8 senior officials who represented the highest levels of American counterterrorism leadership. They were offering her the chance to step out of the shadows and use her real capabilities to save lives, while providing official cover for actions that would otherwise raise impossible questions about her background. The decision she had been avoiding for 9 years was no longer optional. The transformation was being forced by circumstances beyond her control, and 43 lives depended on her willingness to abandon the quiet civilian identity she had worked so hard to construct. I might know someone, Sarah said quietly, accepting the contractor agreement and understanding that with those 4 words, Sarah Chen, the IT manager, had just ceased to exist. In her place sat someone the government had accidentally discovered. A weapon they desperately needed and were finally prepared to unleash. The contractor agreement contained 47 pages of legal language that essentially granted Sarah Chen extraordinary operational authority while absolving the government of responsibility for any actions she might take. As she signed the final page, Director Hawkins dismissed everyone except General Rodriguez and CIA Analyst Park, transforming the meeting from a bureaucratic briefing into something that resembled a classified mission planning session. Ms. Chen, Rodriguez began, settling back into his chair with the relaxed posture of someone preparing for a long and detailed conversation. Now that we have appropriate legal frameworks in place, perhaps we can discuss more specific aspects of the situation we're facing. Sarah recognized the subtle shift in tone and body language around the room. The formal interrogation had ended, replaced by the kind of professional consultation that occurred between experienced operators. They still didn't know exactly who she was, but they had clearly decided she was someone worth trusting with information that went far beyond standard civilian briefings. "The individual you spoke with today," Park said, consulting classified files on his laptop, has been tentatively identified through voice pattern analysis and linguistic markers. "We believe Commander Razak is actually Halil Nazari, a former Afghan army captain who defected in 2019 and subsequently established his own militant organization." Sarah maintained her expression of polite interest while privately marveling at how quickly the CIA's analytical capabilities had reached the same conclusion she had arrived at within seconds of hearing Nazari's voice. The difference was that her identification had been based on direct operational experience that officially had never happened. "What kind of operational history does he have?" Sarah asked, phrasing the question in terms that a civilian consultant might reasonably pose. Rodriguez pulled up a tactical assessment on the wall-mounted monitor. "Extensive combat experience during the Afghan conflict, specialized training in asymmetric warfare, and demonstrated capability in planning complex operations. He's also known for psychological manipulation and propaganda techniques designed to maximize media impact." The profile matched Sarah's own intelligence assessments of Nazari, but she was surprised by how much classified information the government was willing to share with someone whose background they still didn't fully understand. Either they were more desperate than they were admitting, or they had drawn conclusions about her capabilities that went beyond what she had explicitly revealed. "Most concerning," Park added, "is his documented history of executing hostages when negotiations failed to meet his demands. Intelligence reports from 3 previous incidents suggest he views prisoner execution as a tactical tool rather than an emotional response." Sarah absorbed this information while calculating revised timeline estimates for various response options. If Nazari was operating according to his established patterns, the window for successful negotiation was probably shorter than anyone realized. He was likely already preparing for final demands that would be designed to fail, providing justification for the hostage executions he had planned from the beginning. "What kind of tactical resources are available for potential rescue operations?" Sarah asked, moving the conversation toward operational planning while maintaining her civilian consultant persona. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Director Hawkins, communicating through subtle signals before responding. "Limited options given. The location and circumstances. SEAL Team 6 is on standby, but deployment to the target area would require several days of preparation and coordination with international partners." Sarah knew from her own experience that special operations units could deploy much faster than Rodriguez was suggesting, which meant either he was being deliberately conservative in his estimates, or there were political constraints preventing rapid deployment. Either way, the official timeline probably wouldn't save the hostages. "The facility where they're being held," Park continued, displaying satellite imagery on the monitor, "is a converted Soviet-era industrial complex, reinforced. Concrete construction, limited access points, defensible positions with excellent visibility in all directions. Any approach would be visible for kilometers." Sarah studied the satellite images with the practiced eye of someone who had planned similar operations, automatically identifying potential insertion routes, overwatch positions, and extraction corridors. The facility was indeed challenging from a tactical perspective, but it wasn't impregnable if you understood the architectural weaknesses inherent in Soviet industrial design. "Are there any local resources that might provide additional intelligence?" Sarah asked. "Security contractors, logistics providers, anyone with current information about the facility and surrounding area?" Hawkins consulted her classified files before responding. "We're working through State Department channels to identify potential sources, but that process typically takes weeks to develop reliable intelligence. Time we don't have." Sarah recognized the opening she had been waiting for. "The person I mentioned earlier, the one who might be able to help with this situation, has extensive contacts in the region." People who work in private security and intelligence consulting. They might be able to provide more immediate information. Rodriguez leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of contacts? Private military contractors, former government personnel, local nationals with intelligence backgrounds? A combination of all three, Sarah replied, which was entirely accurate while being deliberately vague about how she had developed such an extensive network. The private security industry in that region includes a lot of people with specialized experience and current operational knowledge. Park made notes while speaking. How quickly could those contacts provide useful intelligence? We're working against a compressed timeline with the militants accelerating their demands. Sarah pretended to consider the question while actually calculating how long it would take to reactivate communication channels she had used during her classified military service. Probably within 6 to 8 hours, assuming they're available and willing to cooperate. The estimate was deliberately conservative. Sarah knew she could have detailed intelligence about the facility within 2 hours if she was willing to reveal the depth of her network connections. But moving too fast would raise questions about capabilities that were supposed to remain hidden. There's another issue we need to discuss, Hawkins said, her tone becoming more serious. The research that Dr. Rodriguez and her team were working on isn't just advanced composite materials. It's part of a classified program developing armor systems for next-generation military platforms. Sarah had suspected as much based on Nazari's comments during their phone conversation, but the confirmation added layers of complexity to the operational equation. If the hostages possessed knowledge of classified military technology, preventing their capture alive might be considered more important than rescue operations. How sensitive is the information they have access to? Sarah asked. Rodriguez's expression grew grim. Sensitive enough that losing it to hostile actors would compromise American military advantages for the next decade. The Pentagon has already indicated that preventing intelligence compromise is a higher priority than individual casualty avoidance. The statement was delivered in the clinical language of strategic planning, but Sarah understood the brutal calculus underneath. If rescue operations failed, the government might authorize strikes against the facility to prevent technology transfer, regardless of American casualties. That changes the risk assessment significantly, Sarah observed, maintaining her civilian consultant role while privately planning operations that would prevent such terrible choices. Exactly, Hawkins agreed, which is why we need to explore unconventional options that might succeed where standard approaches would fail. Options that require the kind of specialized expertise and local knowledge that your contact might be able to provide. Sarah realized they were offering her increasingly direct authorization to take actions that went far beyond civilian capabilities. The legal framework they had established was designed to provide official cover for operations that would otherwise be impossible to explain or justify. What level of authority would be available for unconventional approaches? Sarah asked. Carefully, Rodriguez consulted classified documents before responding. Presidential authorization for any actions necessary to prevent intelligence compromise and secure the release of American personnel. Essentially unlimited operational discretion, with appropriate legal protections. The scope of authority they were offering was extraordinary, suggesting they understood they were dealing with someone whose capabilities went far beyond what her official background suggested. Sarah wondered how much they had actually figured out about her true identity, and whether the legal frameworks were designed to protect her as much as authorize her actions. I'll need to make some secure communications, Sarah said, beginning to accept the role they were offering her. The people I'm thinking of are very careful about operational security, and they'll want verification that any cooperation would be appropriately protected. Park nodded understanding. We can provide secure communication facilities and appropriate credentials. How soon can you make contact? Sarah checked her watch, calculating time zones and operational schedules within the hour. But I want to be clear about something. If these people agree to help, they'll expect complete operational autonomy. They don't work well with bureaucratic oversight or committee decision-making. Hawkins and Rodriguez exchanged another series of subtle glances before Hawkins responded. Given the circumstances and timeline constraints, appropriate operational flexibility would be authorized. The priority is results, not adherence to standard procedures. Sarah stood and moved toward the secure communication equipment, understanding that she was about to cross a line that would make her transformation from civilian to operator irreversible. But 43 lives were at stake, and she was probably the only person in the room who understood what saving them would actually require. One more thing, Rodriguez said as Sarah reached the communication terminal. Your contact, do they have any experience with the specific type of adversary we're facing? Someone like Nazari represents a sophisticated opponent with advanced training and significant resources. Sarah paused with her hand on the secure phone, recognizing the perfect opportunity to begin revealing her true qualifications. They've dealt with similar situations before, successfully. The understatement was so massive it was almost amusing. But it planted the suggestion that her mysterious contact possessed exactly the kind of experience that would be needed for this operation. What she didn't mention was that her contact was sitting in the same room, wearing civilian clothes and wire-rimmed glasses. As Sarah activated the secure communication line, she realized she was about to initiate a carefully orchestrated deception, designed to transform her from questioned civilian into authorized operator. The network of contacts she was supposedly calling were real people with real capabilities, but they would be acting as cover for operations she would conduct herself. The phone call she was about to make would begin the final phase of her 9-year transformation from Navy SEAL to IT manager and back again. But this time, she would be operating with official authorization and unlimited resources, rather than hiding her capabilities behind a false identity. This is Sarah Chen requesting secure communication with operational assets in the Afghanistan region, she said into the encrypted handset, beginning a conversation that would officially never happen while setting in motion a rescue operation that would save 43 lives. Behind her, 3 senior government officials listened to someone they believed was a civilian consultant making contact with mysterious specialists who might be able to accomplish what the entire United States government could not. They had no idea they were actually listening to one of the most dangerous weapons in the American military arsenal, finally accepting a mission that would require every skill she had spent 9 years trying to forget. The real operation was about to begin. The secure communication line connected to Marcus Tank Williams, Sarah's former team leader who now ran a legitimate private security consulting firm in Dubai. His voice carried the same gravelly authority she remembered from countless classified operations, though he operated under corporate cover that was far more authentic than her own had been. Sarah, he said after she identified herself using coded phrases from their military service. It's been a long time. I heard through the network that you disappeared into corporate life somewhere. Corporate life is getting complicated, Sarah replied, knowing that Tank would understand the subtext. I'm working as a consultant on a situation that requires specialized expertise, the kind you and the team used to provide. Director Hawkins, General Rodriguez, and Analyst Park listened to this conversation while believing they were overhearing Sarah Chen contact independent operators who might be willing to help resolve the hostage crisis. They had no way of knowing they were actually listening to former teammates coordinate a reunion operation. Tank's voice sharpened with professional interest. What kind of situation? And what level of authorization are we talking about? 43. American nationals being held by a sophisticated militant organization in Afghanistan. Sarah replied, providing just enough detail to communicate the scope. without revealing operational security details over an encrypted, but not completely secure line, presidential authorization for any necessary actions. There was a pause as Tank processed this information, calculating the implications and requirements for the kind of operation Sarah was describing. That significant commitment. What kind of timeline and resources? Less than 36 hours. Unlimited resources within legal frameworks. The principals understand this requires unconventional approaches by people with appropriate backgrounds. Rodriguez leaned forward, clearly impressed by the professional tone of the conversation. Sarah was demonstrating exactly the kind of connections to specialized operators that the government desperately needed but couldn't officially acknowledge. "I'll need to make some calls," Tank replied. "But I can probably assemble a team within 12 hours. Insertion capabilities, technical support, extraction resources, the full package." Sarah felt relief wash over her as she realized her former teammates were still operational and available. The network of special operations veterans who had transitioned to private sector work maintained informal communication channels and mutual support agreements that could be activated for situations exactly like this one. "What about local intelligence?" Sarah asked. "Current facility layouts, security patterns, hostage locations?" "I know people who know things," Tank replied in the carefully vague language of classified operations. "Give me 6 hours and I'll have everything you need." "But Sarah?" His voice carried a warning tone. "If this goes sideways, it goes very sideways. These kinds of operations don't have middle ground outcomes." Sarah understood the warning. Hostage rescue operations succeeded completely or failed catastrophically, with very little possibility for partial success or graceful withdrawal. Once committed, the team would be operating beyond the reach of official support or legal protection. "Understood," Sarah replied. "I'll send you encrypted coordination details and initial intelligence assessments. Primary contact protocols remain in effect." "Roger that. Tank out." Sarah ended the call and turned to face the 3 government officials who had been listening to what they believed was the recruitment of independent contractors for an unauthorized military operation. Their expressions suggested a mixture of relief and concern about the legal implications of what they had just authorized. "Your contact sounds very professional," Rodriguez observed carefully. "Military background?" "Most people in that industry have some form of military or law enforcement experience," Sarah replied, which was true while being deliberately uninformative about the specific nature of Tank's qualifications. "It's a specialized field that requires particular skills and mindset." Hawkins consulted her legal briefing materials. "We need to be very careful about how this operation is structured and documented. Using private contractors for hostage rescue creates complex liability and oversight issues." Sarah recognized that the government officials were beginning to realize they had authorized something that existed in a legal gray area between official military action and completely unauthorized private operations. The contractor agreement she had signed provided some protection, but it couldn't completely shield them from political consequences if the operation went wrong. "The team I'm assembling understands operational security and legal frameworks," Sarah said reassuringly. "They've worked with government agencies before, and they know how to structure operations to minimize political exposure." Park looked up from his laptop where he had been taking detailed notes. "What kind of operational timeline are we looking at?" "The militants have accelerated their demands, and we're receiving intelligence that suggests they might begin executing hostages earlier than originally threatened." Sarah's blood chilled as she processed this information. If Nazari was moving ahead of his stated timeline, it meant he was either responding to perceived threats or preparing to implement whatever his real plan had been from the beginning. "How much earlier?" Sarah asked. "Possibly within the next 18 hours, Park replied grimly. NSA intercepts suggest increased activity at the facility, and there's been a significant reduction in communication patterns that usually indicates preparation for final operations. Sarah realized that whatever rescue operation she assembled would have to be executed with minimal preparation and reconnaissance. The kind of hasty mission planning that violated every principle of special operations, but was sometimes necessary when time ran out faster than preparation allowed. "I need to accelerate the team assembly," Sarah said, moving back toward the secure communication equipment. "And I'll need access to real-time intelligence updates and tactical support resources." Rodriguez nodded approval. "Whatever you need. We're setting up a joint operations center that will provide continuous support and coordination. You'll have direct access to satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and tactical assessments." Sarah activated the secure line again, this time calling a different number that connected to Jessica Ghost Martinez, her former teammate who now worked as an intelligence consultant, specializing in Central Asian operations. Ghost had maintained contacts throughout the region and possessed exactly the kind of current intelligence that would be crucial for mission success. "Sarah fucking Chen," Ghost said without preamble, her voice carrying the amused profanity that had characterized their friendship during military service. "I was wondering when you'd surface again. Tank said you might be calling. I need current intelligence on a facility in Kandahar province," Sarah said, providing GPS coordinates and operational parameters. "Hostile actors, American hostages, time-sensitive situation. Give me 30 minutes. Ghost replied with the confidence of someone who had built extensive intelligence networks over years of careful cultivation. "I've got eyes on the ground who can provide real-time assessments." "What kind of tactical support are you planning?" Sarah glanced at the government officials listening to her conversation, realizing she needed to provide enough detail to coordinate with her team while maintaining the fiction that she was a civilian consultant working with independent contractors. "Small team, direct action, minimal footprint," Sarah replied using terminology that would sound professional to the listening officials while communicating specific operational parameters to Ghost. "Urban environment, multiple hostages, sophisticated opposition, understood. I'll compile a complete intelligence package including facility layouts, security patterns, hostage locations, and extraction routes. Sending to your secure email within the hour." After ending the call, Sarah found herself facing 3 government officials who looked both impressed and increasingly concerned about the scope of what they had authorized. The professional competence of her contacts was obviously reassuring, but it also highlighted the extraordinary nature of the operation they were supporting. "Miss Chen," Hawkins said carefully, "I need to ask about the legal status of these individuals you're coordinating with. Are they U.S. citizens? Do they have appropriate security clearances? What kind of oversight and accountability measures are in place?" Sarah had been expecting these questions and had prepared answers that would satisfy immediate concerns while avoiding details that might compromise operational security. "All primary team members are U.S. citizens with appropriate clearances and extensive experience in similar operations. They operate according to strict professional standards and legal frameworks." The answers were completely accurate while being deliberately vague about the specific nature of those professional standards and legal frameworks. Sarah's former teammates possessed security clearances that were technically still active, even though they were no longer officially serving in military capacities. Rodriguez consulted his tactical planning materials. "What kind of equipment and logistical support will they require?" "We can arrange for pre-positioned resources or rapid deployment of specialized gear." Sarah considered the requirements for the kind of operation she was actually planning, balancing the need for appropriate equipment against the desire to minimize official government involvement. "Standard tactical gear, communication equipment, extraction vehicles, nothing exotic or requiring special authorization." The reality was that her team would need sophisticated weapons, electronic surveillance equipment, and possibly explosive ordnance for breaching operations. But those resources could be acquired through private channels without creating official records that might cause political problems later. Park interrupted with urgent information from his monitoring equipment. "We're receiving a new communication from the militant group. They want to conduct another phone call immediately, not waiting for the scheduled contact time." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the tactical implications. Unscheduled communications typically indicated either escalating demands or preparation for final operations. Nazari was accelerating his timeline, which meant the window for rescue operations was closing faster than anyone had anticipated. "I should take that call," Sarah said, moving toward the communication equipment. "The rapport I established earlier might be our best chance for gathering additional intelligence." Hawkins nodded agreement while indicating that recording and analysis equipment should be activated. "We need to understand what's driving the acceleration in their timeline. Any intelligence you can extract could be crucial for planning rescue operations." Sarah settled into the communication chair, adjusting her headset while privately preparing for what might be her final conversation with Halil Nazari before transitioning from negotiator to operator. The role she had been playing for the past several hours was about to end, replaced by the direct action mission she had been avoiding for 9 years. But 43 lives were at stake, and time was running out faster than bureaucratic processes could respond. Soon, she would have to abandon the fiction of being a civilian consultant and reveal the true nature of her capabilities. The secure line activated with the familiar crackle of encrypted satellite communication. Nazari's voice came through clearly, but the tone was different from their previous conversation, more urgent, more decisive. "Ms. Chen, I hope you have good news for me. My patience with American promises is reaching its limit." Sarah recognized the shift in Nazari's psychological state and understood that the negotiation phase of the operation was essentially over. Whatever happened next would be determined by actions, not words. "We're making progress on the prisoner releases," Sarah replied, maintaining her diplomatic cover while preparing for the intelligence-gathering conversation that would provide crucial information for the rescue operation she was secretly planning. The final phase of her transformation was about to begin. "We have new intelligence," Nazari said, his voice carrying deadly certainty. "American military units are positioning for attack. You have deceived us with false negotiations." Sarah's blood went cold. If Nazari believed rescue operations were imminent, he would execute hostages immediately to prevent their recovery. "There are no military operations planned. We're committed to peaceful resolution." "Peaceful?" Nazari laughed bitterly. "I know who you are, Sarah Chen, former Navy SEAL, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Did you think we would not investigate the woman who spoke to us with such professional knowledge?" The line went dead. Around the room, 3 government officials stared at Sarah with expressions of shock and dawning understanding. Her carefully maintained cover identity had just been shattered by the very person she had been negotiating to defeat. "Well," Director Hawkins said quietly, "I suppose we can dispense with the consultant fiction now." Sarah removed her headset and stood, her posture unconsciously shifting from corporate manager to military operator. 9 years of hiding were over. "How long do we have before he starts killing hostages?" "Based on his psychological profile, probably less than 6 hours, Rodriguez replied, no longer speaking to a civilian but to a fellow warrior. Sarah nodded, already calculating mission timelines and resource requirements. "Then we better get my team moving. Tank, Ghost, and the others are going to earn their money tonight." For 9 years, she had successfully hidden her true identity. But some skills were too important to keep buried when lives hung in the balance. The mild-mannered IT manager was gone forever. replaced by one of America's most dangerous weapons, finally unleashed to do what she did best. The real Sarah Chen was going to war. What happened next in this incredible true story will shock you. Did Sarah and her team successfully rescue all 43 hostages? How did her corporate colleagues react when they discovered their quiet IT manager was actually a Navy SEAL? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, so you never miss our amazing true stories of courage and determination. Drop a comment below telling us what you think Sarah should have done differently, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this inspiring story of hidden strength and ultimate sacrifice.